100 children to do. This year the Queen Quet coming up. 101 more again for this year Gullah Geechee TV Nayshun News. I'm so glad if I have 100 children join me this year time. My hometown and things like that. Beaufort, South Kakalaki. 100 children when 100 are coming down here. Plenty of time. 100 to see me. You're going to cross the water anyway. Right there on St. Nala. Well, this year day we had time for bringing her back downtown in Beaufort. Well, 100 usually see me for the Gullah Festival. Well, look here, we don't never stop celebrating we story yup in Beaufort, South Kakalaki. Because we got plenty of things to do with we who the Gullah Geechee. Now, this young man, 100 yet me crack my teeth about 4 now. Robert Small, 100 see me from the big one board and thing with the name on top of and all that. Well, look here, we have time this year season for bringing one special thing one day here in Beaufort, South Kakalaki. And so, for all 100 children, and yet too much more of the life. Besides, the board, the planner, I don't want to get plenty today. Because my guy with me, Mr. Dennis Kennedy, and things like that. So that he can crack a teeth with me a little while. Now, Dennis is a historian and a lecturer on the Gullah statesman himself, Robert Smalls. Now, wonderful day to sit here with Dennis. I know we'd rather be sitting out on the porch, though. Because even though it's December, it's a Sea Island December. The sun is shining. We don't have to have overcoats on. I know y'all are jealous. I'm sorry. I don't need to talk about that, right? But that's one of the things that we get to enjoy is being on the water, looking at it, but having warmth come in. And whenever I walk these streets, I always think of the same warmth that Robert Smalls must have felt from these waterways and the warmth he had for this town we're in Beaufort. And Dennis, I know you came here to Beaufort from elsewhere, but it seems like you have literally gotten your feet wet in the history of Beaufort, South Carolina.
Yeah, when we arrived here about 6 years ago, we were intrigued with the Robert Smalls name. Was all over the town.
Yes, it is.
Many memorials, streets named after him, some of the public schools are named after him. And so I became intrigued with finding out more about the story. I do ship models as a hobby. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as I found out that the planter was a part of the story, right. It intrigued me then to go forward and try to build a ship model of that vessel. And so that's how I got started. Into the story.
Yes.
And the more I got into it, the more I was intrigued with just this fascinating story. And,
yes.
And was contacted by Helen Moore, the curator of the exhibit. And of course, Helen and her family have put this exhibit together. Originally, it was an idea to try to salvage the furniture that was handed down to various parts of the family.
Yes.
And as generations passed, Helen seemed to be the recipient of various groupings of furniture. Mm-hmm. And so thus you have the Robert Smalls collection, right, coming from various aspects of the family. Right. And she's gone forward now and created this exhibit that is now on national tour. Mm-hmm. It's been in numerous venues around the country. To date, it's been seen by over 50,000 people.
Outstanding.
Up and down the East Coast. And from here, it's destined to go on to Philadelphia, possibly Kansas City, Chicago, Detroit. Right. The National Mall in Washington, D.C. is scheduled.
Right, for the Civil War Museum.
Exactly.
That they have on the mall. But now, interestingly enough, it's also going to come back here to another city that had a great deal to do with the part of the story that many who've heard of Robert Smalls hears about. Most of you who listen to this show, you've heard about Robert Smalls was born here in Beaufort, South Carolina, but eventually got rented out essentially to a port in Charleston, South Carolina. So we know this exhibit has been the Avery Research Center in Charleston, which is a sister research center to the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition, and that it will be going back there in May 2012. Is that right?
That's right. In fact, the exhibit will be displayed there in conjunction with the National Park Service to do the 150-year celebration of the sail to freedom of Robert Smalls, his crew members, and the family. Right. And on the weekend of May the 12th and 13th, that's a Saturday, it's a Friday night and a Saturday, There will be panel discussions, and there will be lectures and presentations. Saturday evening, there will be a reenactment of the Great Escape, where the National Park Service will have one of their touring yachts sail out from the wharves and go out to Fort Sumter.
Which is outstanding, and I've taken that journey many, many times myself, and it is, again, a beautiful place to go, but also a place you feel so much power and energy that you really capture yourself in the moment. And most of you who watch me interview people all year, you've heard me mentioning this is the 150th commemoration of the U.S. Civil War, the sesquicentennial. So now when we're talking about 150 years of that flight to freedom, so to speak, that escape by ship, it is very powerful to the story of Gullah Geechees. But now, you know what I find interesting, Dennis, is that Avery Research Center was a school. And a lot of times when people talk about Robert Smalls, they talk about the military action, they talk about the enslavement, they talk about these aspects, but they don't talk about his role in public education. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in fact, Robert was the prime mover and shaker to bring public education to South Carolina. Immediately following the end of the Civil War, he entered into school board activities here in Beaufort County and created the first public black school right here in the town of Beaufort. During his tenure as a South Carolina state representative and in the Senate also, he was responsible for legislation that created the first black public schools in the state and the state education legislation that followed.
Right. And see, so a lot of times people who come to Beaufort County, they'll hear about Mitchellville, and they'll hear about the school that was at Mitchellville. They'll come to St. Helena Island and hear about Penn, which is First Trade Agricultural Normal School for Freedmen, but they don't hear about what Robert Smalls did for public schooling, for free public schooling. And so his daughter, I understand, learned how to read at school.
Elizabeth, his firstborn daughter, learned to read there at that first school that he established. It's an interesting side note that one of the presidents had been on vacation in Florida and stopped here in Beaufort on the way back to Washington. And as they disembarked the ship there in the harbor here in Beaufort and came in to spend the night, as they came into the town, Robert and his daughter Elizabeth were on the balcony of the hotel. It was the 4th of July weekend. And Elizabeth read the Declaration of Independence to the crowd that had gathered. She was at the age of 10 at the time. So here's the president out in the crowd listening to this 10-year-old child read the Declaration of Independence. And Robert was there on the balcony with her.
Isn't that outstanding? And there's a lot of grown folks who have never read the entire Declaration of Independence nor heard that story. Now, something that I also find very intriguing, when you talk about the Declaration of Independence, you talk about the Constitution, these are pillars in American history in a lot of ways. And so the Emancipation Proclamation is a major pillar as well in American history and the story of people of African descent in America. And this is actually the International Year of People of African Descent. Now, as you and I went through the exhibit, looking at various things in it, one of the things I loved was a book that had correspondence in it with Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington and various other people that Robert Smalls communicated with, and many of them we know to be orators and educators and writers. And so here it is, looking at the work they did, but then the work that we don't know happens behind the scenes of much of their work in their interactions. Tell me about what you know of the interactions with someone else that Robert Smalls corresponded with, Abraham Lincoln, and how that influenced the Emancipation Proclamation.
Well, when Robert was successful in escaping Charleston with the family, he was interviewed, debriefed by Samuel DuPont, the commanding admiral of the naval fleet here, and also by General David Hubbard. And in those interviews, they were so impressed with his bravery and his comfort zone in dealing with people of prominence that they thought he would be a good emissary to send to Washington. General Hunter had realized that he did not have enough troops in order to capture the city of Charleston. So he was looking for ways to increase his manpower.
Right.
And so they were looking for a way to increase the forces and get Secretary of War Stanton and President Lincoln to authorize the enlistment of freemen blacks to do that. Well, when Robert went to Washington to be the recipient of the war prize monies for the planter, he and President Lincoln were just talking, fireside chat, kind of like we are here now. And Robert so impressed Lincoln that it's said by Billingsley that Lincoln started penning the first drafts of the Emancipation Proclamation as a result of his conversations with
Robert Smalls.
Now, that may be a story that's somewhat suspect, but according to the historians and the researchers, it's a true story.
Right.
And then later on, he made a second trip to Washington in August of that same summer, where he met with Secretary of War Stanton, and in fact was successful in getting the black troops authorized, which became the 1st and 2nd South Carolina Volunteers and the 54th and 55th Massachusetts, of course, of the movie Glory fame.
Absolutely.
Barry Wagner and all that.
Absolutely.
So those two regiments from the state of Massachusetts are a direct result of Robert's trip to Washington and Stanton back in August.
Which is outstanding.
In 1862.
In 1862. And the thing about it, 1862 has so many different directions we can go in the discussion of what was taking place at that time, even with the land auctions that were taking place. And we know that here in Beaufort, the Robert Smalls house, what we call the Robert Smalls house now, was actually the McKee home.
That's right.
That Robert Smalls and his mother Lydia had been enslaved in, but then Robert Smalls was able to later own that house and buy it. Yes, and so again, you know, when you come to Beaufort, you never know what's beneath the cobblestones in the streets. There's a lot of stories to tell. And so it's so powerful. Here at the Verdier House where we're sitting now, it's really intriguing to me that the exhibit is here. And so we're going to be looking at what else is going to be coming once this exhibit closes on December the 20th and it heads on to another place. What is going to come in its place, do you think, here at the Verdier House?
Fort Fremont. There will be an exhibit coming in on Fort Fremont, which is down toward Land's End.
Right, on St. Helens
On
Island.
beyond, yeah, it's on beyond the Penn Center area on St. Helens Island. So there will be more information for those people that are in the St. Helena, Gullah, Geechee community.
Yeah.
For them to come in and see.
Absolutely right. And then y'all can come across the bridge on that thing like that and see the real Fort Fremont and take a giant week, understand? And so definitely it is wonderful to have an opportunity to be back in the Verdier House. I hadn't been inside in a long time. But of course, who else would bring me indoors but Robert Smalls? Yes, and Spirit seems to march with me many times in many of the journeys I'm taking. And I'm so glad that he has shook you and awakened you to speak his story.
And it's been my pleasure to sit here and discuss this with you, reminisce a little bit about my research and history.
Definitely. And so we definitely have to keep track of you, and we want to be there when this exhibition goes on to Avery also to hear your lecture that's going to be going on. And if you come down for that lecture at Avery Research Center May 12th and 13th, hang around, plan a 2-week visit so then you can come back to Beaufort. Do what Robert Smalls did, leave Charleston, come on back to Beaufort and join us for the Gullah Festival Memorial Day weekend, right across from where Dennis and I have a wonderful view, looking out at our story right here in Beaufort, South Kakalaki. Thank you so much, Dennis, for being on Gullah Geechee TV and Hunter Chillin, Hunter No, this year, the what going on. My race needs no special defense, for the past history of them in this country proves them to be the equal of any people anywhere. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life.